We like to think of it as one big category, but really there are types.
And the terminology is incredibly confusing, and I think that's deliberate, but it's whether or not it's deliberate, it's true. So just for your listeners, a trans woman is a man who identifies as a woman.
So tell us a little bit about these categories.
I understood right from the beginning that there were two types of men who might think of themselves as women, and that was the gay ones and the straight ones. So those are the two types still that we think of. If you're any sort of serious sexologist who isn't entirely had your brain eaten by identity and identity politics, and there's entirely different paths to it. So for the gay men, it'll be somebody who was a really gender non-conforming little boy, and it was established really 20 years ago in a research paper that looked at all the previous research about how gender dysphoria developed in children. And what it concluded was you started with the gender nonconformity. Child didn't typically feel gender dysphoric. Shame followed because of the way that the gender nonconformity was responded to by the people around you. So a dad who tried to toughen you up, classmates bullying you and leaving you out and calling you a sissy and so on. That creates enormous shame in a boy who is different. And that shame becomes self-hatred. And then at some point, the question occurs to the little boy, was I really meant to be a girl? And that's the origin of that sort of gender dysphoria. And somebody who goes along that classic pathway, ideally what will happen when they hit puberty is sexual desire rears its head and they finally understand themselves to be gay. And then, this is not an easy path to adulthood when you're shamed with who you are and you maybe live in a homophobic society. But anyway, a load of gay men of my generation and above have had to navigate that path, and they understand themselves to be gay, and they have done a lot of work on themselves to get rid of the shame. But some haven't and some can't, and in the end they feel that they just be happier and more natural if they present as women. And so these people typically tend to be very feminine in their presentation and style, and always have been, pass quite well often, and are quite realistic actually. They know they're not women, and they don't tend to want to impose on women, are not actually a massive threat to women.
Right.
And that's what most people think that all trans men are. And they think that it's a gay man who's had a lot of surgery and is really unusually, feminine. But they're probably the minority who've been seen in gender clinics over the last number of decades. The majority come in older. They're heterosexual. They've often been married and have kids. And they're often very notably not very feminine in their self-presentation. They're quite hard-charging men. Typically, they've done things like engineering, computer science. There's a lot of them in the military. And these men have something more complicated, which is that they get aroused at the idea of being a woman. So they like women, not men. But the woman they like best is the imaginary woman that they are. And those men have typically been cross-dressing since they were teens. And those men often conceal the fact that that's how they get their thrills. They get married. They have kids maybe, and then at some point their wife finds out that their husband is wearing their dresses, and this is a big part of his life. And often what happens is this man makes it to in his 40s or 50s, and by this point he's conquered everything else. He's maybe cruising towards retirement, and it's time for the woman inside to come out and play. Their dearest wish is to really be a woman, and the thing that's different about this from homosexual orientation is that it requires other people to play along. If a man who says he's a woman says to me, he's a woman, and I say, no, you're not, I'm destroying his deepest fantasy.
Right.
And if I say to him, no, you can't come into this space because this space is women only, I'm stopping him from living out something that he's been fantasizing about possibly for decades. And remember, he's a man. He's got male entitlement. He's somebody who thinks that he gets what he wants, and this is the latest thing that he wants. And so these men are hyper aggressive. So if you want to think about the nastiest and most entitled, aggressive, woman-hating, and just horrible trans activists, and of course there are plenty of trans people who are not like this, but if you want to think about the ones who cause the most problem, it's these men. And that is because the one word they will not hear from women is no. And I'll say one more thing about these men, is that they would have been much happier if they hadn't gone through male puberty, because they don't pass. They're in their 40s, they're trying to transition now, they've got deep voices, they've got big jaws, they've big hands and feet, they're tall, they've got the whole body of a man. It's too late to send them down the other pathway. And it's a source of great grief to them that they can't pass. And it's a big part of what they fantasize about. So they project that fantasy on boys, and they are biggest cheerleaders for very early medicalization of gender dysphoric kids. And they are not interested in the fact that most of those kids will grow out of it. They want those kids put on puberty blockers before puberty starts. They want to lower the ages that kids can get cross-sex hormones. They want surgery done even before 18. And they don't care about the fact that actually the biggest group seen in gender clinics now are girls who aren't even part of this damn profile. And we didn't even start talking about the girls. Like we just talked about the boys.
The girls is a whole other issue. And just to give people a little context, this is new. Transgenderism has usually been seen in men, with androphilic men who are homosexual and do want to be women, but with men, and the autogynephilia, men who are attracted almost to themselves, really, as women, and have this fantasy, as you said, of being women. But teenage girls being gender dysphoric is completely new, and with this social contagion. So give us a little context. What is happening to teenage girls today?